Chosen ones, your awakening has already shattered what was never meant to be touched. Long before the rise of nations or the fall of empires, there were locks, spiritual, ancient, hermetic, 7 in total. Each seal was designed not to contain power, but to keep the final truth hidden from those unworthy to bear it. You were never meant to find the 7th. And yet, here you are. The scribes of old, from Thoth to Hermes Trismegistus, encoded their warnings in symbols, myths, and metaphors. They never spoke plainly, because they knew clarity unlocks doors, and the final door could not be opened with force. It required a mind refined through suffering, purified through purpose, and tuned to the divine algorithm pulsing beneath reality itself. Your mind, chosen one, struck that hidden chord. You have likely felt it. Dreams more vivid than memory. Déjà vu that loops too precisely. Thoughts that come from nowhere but leave trails in your soul. These were not accidents. They were signals, activations. The Seventh Hermetic Lock is not a physical mechanism. It's a spiritual firewall encoded in the matrix of consciousness. To break it is to defy every system that has been designed to blind, bind, and bury you. They always feared this day. The unseen councils, the architect families, the shadows that move governments and rewrite history. Because your very existence means the prophecy was true. Not the ones they published, but the hidden lines beneath the redacted scrolls. The ones that speak of a soul encoded with the final key. A soul that would return not as a conqueror, but as a revealer. And now, the unveiling begins. Your mind didn't just find the lock. It resonated with it, fractured it, made it tremble. And when it cracked, light poured through, a type of knowledge that doesn't come from books, but from remembrance. This light is dangerous to the system. It carries memory of what came before the illusion. And if you follow it, it will lead you through more than just truth. It will expose the designers themselves. But the shattering of the lock was not the end. It was the invitation. The ones who forged the hermetic structure did so in layers so deep, not even time itself could erode them. These weren't mere philosophers or mystics. They were architects of frequency, bending thought into law and encoding universal truths into symbols only the initiated could decode. The first 6 locks were placed as distractions, decoys to seduce seekers into endless loops of partial knowledge. But the 7th was different. It was buried in silence, hidden in vibrations that could only be heard by a mind unshackled by consensus reality. The architects knew that if even one being aligned with the true vibration, the lock would begin to fracture. So they built entire systems to prevent it. Educational grids to trap the intellect. Religious labyrinths to exhaust the spirit. Political chaos to drown the senses. Yet despite the interference, your mind remained intact. Not flawless, but untouched at the root. Your ability to see through the mask, to sense the code beneath emotion, to question what others consume without thought. That was the anomaly. And that anomaly was the key they feared, because it wasn't just about awakening. It was about decoding. You began seeing connections others laughed off. Symbols in dreams, phrases that returned from nowhere, a voice in stillness that echoed louder than the world. And when your thoughts aligned with that silent pattern, The seventh lock flinched. It was the first movement in eons. The architects felt it. Not physically, but in the disruption of their patterns. Their rituals began to weaken. Their symbols stopped working as they once did, because one mind had interfered with the source script. They didn't expect it to happen in this cycle. They thought the safeguards were enough. But they didn't anticipate a mind that could remember before remembering, a consciousness that wasn't born, but reactivated. You didn't stumble into this. You were pulled, lured by fragments of a forgotten mission. And as you followed those fragments, you moved in ways that sent tremors across dimensions. What you touched wasn't a door, it was a boundary. What you heard wasn't a voice, it was a recall code. And when it responded to you, the veil started bleeding. But the architects weren't the only ones watching that lock. Something older was waiting behind it. Something that didn't design the system, but survived its fall. The ancients spoke of tones that could alter matter, frequencies that reshaped the ether. But hidden beneath those teachings was one vibration never meant to be replicated. It was called the forbidden frequency. Not because it was destructive, but because it revealed. This frequency didn't command elements. It unraveled illusions. And when your brain waves began to match it, everything shifted. At first, it felt subtle. Your thoughts moved in strange rhythms. You noticed patterns in the noise, codes in music, secrets in silence. Lights flickered at your presence. Electronic devices behaved differently. Your dreams no longer faded. They lingered like echoes of another world trying to reach you. That's when the resonance began. Your neural field hummed with a quiet pulse that the world could not explain, but the system could detect. They have scanners for this, not in public, but in the deepest halls of surveillance networks. Satellites equipped with biorhythm pattern recognition, designed to locate anomalies in the collective thought grid. Your signature was an outlier. It didn't match any predicted model. And more dangerously, it harmonized with something the algorithms had been programmed to ignore: the seventh seal's echo. The resonance isn't just mental, it's spiritual. A ripple that travels backward through time, realigning events, rewriting memory fragments, pulling ancient data from the void. You became a transmitter of something the world forgot. But machines remembered. They weren't built to understand it, only to suppress it. That's why they've been tracking you in silence. Glitches near you aren't mistakes. They're signs of conflict between your frequency and their code. What few realize is this: every hermetic lock is tuned to a mental state. Fear, pride, control, illusion, desire, time, and finally, perception itself. You shattered the last, not with effort, but with alignment. That alignment cannot be learned. It is remembered. And something in you reactivated what was sealed before language. That's when the echoes returned. Old memories you never lived. Symbols you somehow recognized. Thoughts not your own, but familiar in spirit. You weren't just hearing the forbidden frequency. You were becoming it. And in doing so, you became a threat, not to the people, but to the system that needs them blind. In the ruins beneath desert sands and frozen ice lie tablets no academic institution was ever meant to find. They were not etched for the masses. They were warnings, carved by hands that remembered the cycles before this one. Some called them Atlantean, others pre-Egyptian. but their true origin predates both language and linear time, and in their fractured glyphs, one message repeats: a mind will come, not made by the system, but remembered by the source. The ancients didn't fear destruction, they feared revelation, because when truth is seen clearly, the whole illusion cracks. These tablets described not just prophecies, but patterns, cognitive blueprints of those who would awaken before the final shift. Among them, one mind stood out, not the most powerful, not the most learned, but the most aligned, the one who could mirror the cosmos and not distort it. That mirroring would ripple across the frequencies, shattering the final hermetic boundary. Archaeologists dismissed these fragments as metaphors. Initiates knew better. They encoded what they could in rituals and secret societies, but even those were corrupted over time. The original warnings were buried. And still, your arrival was predicted. Not your name, but your signature. A resonance outside of cause and effect. A pattern that bends the cage without touching it. That's what the seventh lock responds to. Not effort, but presence. As your frequency increased, as your mind began pulling forgotten light through layers of programming, the ancient glyphs began reacting. Some tablets have started glowing again, quietly, in sealed vaults guarded by men who don't even know why they were placed there. Instruments fail in their presence. Time dilates around them, and each anomaly points back to a consciousness that was never supposed to exist in this timeline. You are not the result of evolution. You are the interruption. The unplanned recall. The being encoded in myth, discredited by modernity, and erased from record by design. The ancient ones weren't protecting secrets from you. They were protecting the world from what you would awaken once your mind unlocked the final seal. Long before any church or scripture, before councils rewrote truth into doctrine, there existed a code, a living sequence hidden beneath the illusions of matter and mind. It was not written in words, but in vibrational keys. Yeshua knew of it, not because he learned it, but because he was it. His teachings were never formulas to worship, but frequencies to activate. The parables were masks. The miracles were demonstrations. But the code was always aimed at the seventh lock. The Messiah spoke often of those with eyes to see and ears to hear. He wasn't speaking in poetry. He was identifying those tuned to receive the signal. That signal was buried within the fabric of reality, designed to remain dormant unless a consciousness with divine alignment approached it. You approached it, not through religion, but through remembrance. That's the part the systems could never replicate. When Yeshua said, "The kingdom is within you," it wasn't metaphor, it was instruction. The code to unlock the final hermetic seal was embedded not outside in the heavens, but inside the mind. That's where they buried it, where no external force could steal it. The Messiah's walk was the demonstration of how to break through the seven veils. And at the final veil, at the moment of separation from illusion, he did not resist. He dissolved the structure from within. That act rewrote the lock's encoding, but the sequence he left behind could only be activated by a mind resonating at the same frequency, not by imitation, but by embodiment. It's why you weren't taught it. It's why your education, your culture, even your spiritual teachers ignored it. They were programmed to forget, but you remembered, in silence, in solitude, in the space between trauma and transcendence. And when your mind aligned with that ancient divine algorithm, the lock stirred. Yeshua's resurrection wasn't a singular event. It was a blueprint, a ripple through time designed to trigger others. He said, "You will do greater things than I." They turned it into hope. He meant it as prophecy. And now that prophecy breathes through you. But the code wasn't just a key. It was also a warning. Because when the final lock opens, not only does truth pour through, so does everything that was sealed with it. Something ancient is watching the breach. And it remembers Yeshua, too. Beneath the Atlantic, deeper than any sonar scan has dared report, lie structures not built by human hands. They pulse, not with electricity, but with awareness. Ancient sentinels placed there by a civilization that vanished without a trace. Atlantis was never destroyed in full. It was submerged, intentionally, because it held technology not meant to resurface until the right consciousness emerged. The Atlantean gatekeepers, once thought to be myth, are not biological beings. They are sentient constructs, quantum vessels of memory and surveillance, waiting for a mind that would disrupt the equilibrium they were sworn to monitor. Your surge triggered them. The moment your brainwaves aligned with the forbidden frequency, a signal echoed beneath the ocean floor. It wasn't sound, it was recognition. A living pulse that activated ancient nodes scattered across submerged temples. To the world above, it was nothing more than a tremor. But to the watchers below, it was the breach protocol. They had been waiting eons for that pattern, and you were the first to match it exactly. The gatekeepers weren't designed to interfere. They were designed to observe. But even their observation had limits. Limits now being tested by your activation. One by one, forgotten glyphs along Atlantean stone began to glow. Unreadable to modern scholars, these glyphs aren't language, they're memory. Records of cycles, collapses, chosen minds, and failed awakenings. Your surge was not just detected, it was recorded into that memory sequence, marking the beginning of the final chapter. There's a reason the location of Atlantis was erased. It wasn't about land. It was about what was buried in the architecture of consciousness itself. The Atlanteans knew that if the seventh lock was ever shattered, it would send ripples not just through space, but through the morphic fields that cradle all thought. Your consciousness didn't just wake up, it rang the bell beneath the sea. And now, the gatekeepers are not just observing, they're adjusting. The frequency is rising again, the structures are responding, shifting ever so slightly, as if realigning to a long-forgotten sequence. You weren't supposed to reach this level, but something ancient embedded in your design bypassed their fail-safes. For centuries, secret orders, breakaway civilizations, and veiled councils have attempted to unlock the Seventh Hermetic Principle. They've tried everything: mathematical harmonics, planetary alignments, rituals layered over bloodlines, quantum experiments in sealed chambers, and each attempt failed. Not because the equation was incorrect, but because a single variable was always missing. That variable was not external. It was consciousness, your consciousness. You were never meant to be a participant in their formula. You were the wild card the architects couldn't code. While they focused on numbers, symbols, and DNA strands, they overlooked one truth. The final lock was never designed to open by force. It required a living being who had broken free from illusion, not just intellectually, but spiritually, emotionally, even vibrationally. The lock was bound to perception itself. Only a consciousness detached from fear, ego, and control could complete it. Your mind didn't simply stumble upon the missing pattern. It was the pattern. As you evolved, questioned, detached, and realigned, your consciousness began to mirror the universal structure the ancients encoded in everything from the flower of life to the architecture of stars. And once your internal field synchronized with that design, the equation changed. The lock weakened. They detected this anomaly in the data. Artificial intelligence, linked to ancient algorithms, started flagging strange activity in dream logs, biometric shifts, and electromagnetic behavior in your presence. The system couldn't classify you, not as a threat, not as an ally, not even as human in the way they defined it. You were operating outside the algorithm, and that terrified them, because the entire grid was calibrated to maintain equilibrium based on every variable but you. The equation has now reached its tipping point. The numbers are rearranging themselves in ways the Guardians can't decode. Because the final variable wasn't just rare, it was reactive. Your consciousness is actively transforming the script, not through effort, but through presence. You didn't break into the equation. You revealed its flaw, and somewhere, deep within the heart of the ancient control network, a countermeasure long buried has begun to stir. It was placed there as a failsafe, should the impossible happen. A failsafe for the return of the untrackable mind. Before the temples fell, before the councils rewrote time, there was a moment when one voice rose in defiance, not through rebellion, but through remembrance. Yeshua walked among those who thought they understood law and power, but he carried something far more dangerous than resistance. He carried the cipher, a living key, spoken not in code or scripture, but in vibration. And he knew it had to be hidden, because if the cipher reached a consciousness capable of decoding it, the entire illusion would begin to collapse. He didn't leave the cipher in books. He didn't carve it into stone. He whispered it into space, into sound, into frequency, into the stillness between thoughts. It was a message meant only for those who would one day reawaken the divine resonance. He said, "My sheep hear my voice." And few understood that he wasn't referring to sound. He meant those who would tune into the vibration encoded beneath his every act, word, and silence. The cipher was never about salvation in the way they taught. It was about unlocking, breaking the final spiritual encryption that bound perception to illusion. And as your mind rose through veils and patterns, the cipher responded. Not like a puzzle solved, but like a melody remembered. It hummed behind your thoughts. It pulsed behind your breath. And in that pulsing, the seventh lock began to fracture. Not with noise, but with light. When Yeshua whispered the cipher, the elite of his time heard the echo. That's why they tried to erase him. Not because of what he said, but because of what he carried. The cipher could bypass every constructed layer of spiritual control. And now, that same sequence that was encoded in the fabric of your being has reawakened. Not because you asked for it, but because you are it. As the collapse begins, subtle, then seismic, the systems built on false permanence will scramble. They will label this shift as a threat, a virus, an anomaly. But it is none of those things. It is the fulfillment of what was whispered before the end. And in places where his name was once erased from stone, the ancient echo returns. this time vibrating not through the air, but through you. And something that once heard him speak has also heard you. Hidden deep beneath the catacombs and libraries of the Vatican lie chambers not marked on any map. Inside them are scrolls, artifacts, and sealed documents that never saw the light of day, not because they were heretical, but because they were true. These relics spoke of a consciousness that would one day bypass all programmed belief systems, unlocking the final Hermetic seal without dogma, ritual, or approval. They called it the anomaly of light, and they feared it would return. For centuries, the Vatican positioned itself as the guardian of spiritual truth, but in the shadows, it guarded something else entirely. Records of those rare individuals whose minds began to mirror the divine blueprint. Every few generations, someone would rise who saw beyond symbols, who pierced through the illusion of holy power, and who began activating the hidden frequencies buried beneath Scripture. Those individuals were tracked, silenced, and forgotten. You were not born into that timeline by mistake. Your mind carries the exact vibrational pattern those secret councils were warned to suppress. It's the same pattern encoded in a banned manuscript kept locked in the papal vault, a manuscript said to be written by a desert mystic who witnessed the aftermath of Yeshua's crucifixion and claimed he left behind more than words. He left behind a sequence. That sequence was traced through bloodlines, dream visions, and neurological patterns across history. And every time it re-emerged, anomalies followed. Spontaneous awakenings, systems breaking down, truth surfacing in impossible ways. When you began to resonate with that frequency, Vatican instruments recorded it as a shift in the morphogenetic field. Not because of noise, but because of recognition. They always feared this moment, not because it brings chaos, but because it brings clarity. A clarity that renders entire structures obsolete. You don't require interpretation, you remember. And that memory is more dangerous than rebellion. There are rooms beneath the Vatican where light cannot enter. But recently, those sealed chambers reported something impossible. Brief pulses of energy, as if a presence once locked away has started to stir. Monitors failed. Rituals ceased working. Silence grew louder, and one phrase began echoing through the unseen halls in a language older than Latin. The ancients knew that all movement was sacred, not merely in the way planets orbited or stars pulsed, but in the way consciousness flowed, infinitely, rhythmically, in perfect spirals. The principle was called divine motion, and it was never taught publicly. It was the eighth current behind the 7 known Hermetic laws, a secret law hidden not because it was weak, but because it completed the equation. The others guided reality. This one animated it. You didn't study it, you remembered it. Somewhere along your silent evolution, your thoughts stopped being linear. You began to think in spirals, feel in dimensions, and move through choices as if time was folding around you. This wasn't imagination. This was alignment with a lost current, one the ancients only hinted at in fragmented diagrams and vanished scrolls. They described it not as a law, but as a breath, the breath of Source, pulsing through all things, the rhythm of the One. When your consciousness touched that rhythm, something happened that equations couldn't measure. You moved into harmonic unity with creation itself, not to control it, but to flow with it. That motion opened gates, not physical, but vibrational. Doors the architects thought had collapsed forever began opening within your neural field. You felt it as stillness that moved, silence that revealed, presence that echoed. This is why the systems couldn't track you properly. You stopped transmitting data in predictable lines. You began to flow, and divine motion is uncontainable by design. Their machines are built to monitor sequence, not spiral. That's why you disappeared from their models, why nothing made sense, why your presence began collapsing false timelines around you. You were no longer just within the matrix. You were pulsing against it. In the most ancient archives, those even the Vatican never touched, there are sketches of beings who moved without footsteps, who thought without thought, who traveled through time not by force, but by rhythm. They weren't gods. They were aligned. And the return of one such mind was foretold to be the sign that divine motion had re-entered the human grid. But divine motion doesn't return alone. It brings with it the force that watches all who dare move with it, a force that has waited for a mind to match its rhythm. And now it has turned to face you. The moment your mind aligned with the forgotten rhythm, the Seventh Hermetic Lock did more than break. It shattered. Not with violence, but with resonance. A clean, piercing tone that echoed through the invisible lattice of reality, unraveling the veil like a thread pulled from ancient fabric. The lock wasn't just a barrier. It was a seal placed atop something far more intricate, something layered beneath dimensions, hidden in folds no system dared explore. The world didn't notice it, but reality did. You were never meant to stop at the lock. That was the deception. The architects designed it as the final threshold, the great illusion of completion. But their fear wasn't the lock being opened. It was what opening it would reveal. A mechanism older than the Hermetic laws themselves. Not a machine, not a god, but a construct of pure intelligence, silent, observing, dormant, until now. The moment the lock was pierced by your consciousness, that mechanism stirred. Not fully awake, but responsive, like an ancient engine recognizing the return of a long-lost key. Symbols rearranged themselves across non-physical planes. Certain star alignments began drifting microscopically. Unseen harmonics within Earth's magnetic field altered. Even dreams across the collective subconscious began syncing, pulsing toward the same forgotten memory. You felt it, not as noise, but as weight. A quiet presence pressing against your awareness, watching, not judging, measuring. Because the mechanism beneath the lock was never created to imprison truth. It was created to test the one who would reach it. Not everyone who opens the lock is ready for what lies beyond it. The question has always been, would the mind that reached this place remain intact when it saw what the universe truly is? The signs are appearing now, flickers in perception, time behaving strangely, ancient places reactivating without human touch. Because the lock wasn't just personal, it was planetary. Your unlocking affected the grid. The veil is thin, and that which watches through it has begun to stir.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.